Can you hear me? Okay, I want to start by making a comment here on oral literature. Let me see if my thing works. There it is. There are three types of literature that I recognize: oral, written, and visual. With oral literature, you have to listen. It's all in the ear. And Homer tries to create images that you can hear. That's why the simile is so important, the Homeric simile, as you'll see as we go along. The second thing that he does to create images for you as you're listening is the use of myth, because the myths are very visual, and he uses myth in a very specific way. He never tells you the entire myth that he's using. He only picks the part that is relevant to what he's saying at the moment, and then he might use the same myth later on in the book, another part, etc. For example, the myth that is used most than any other is the Atreus myth. The Atreus myth is the story of Agamemnon, Menelaus, Helen of Troy, going to retrieve Helen, etc. That's a very large myth that takes 5 generations, although Homer never goes to 5 generations. He never goes beyond the 3rd generation. He thinks after the 3rd generation, it's not important for the present generation, so you can only go in for 3. And one of the reasons he does that is because there were 3 generations of gods. Zeus, you stop with Zeus, who is the present god. His father used to be Kronos, and his father used to be Uranos. After 3 generations of gods, the Greeks stopped with the last one. So the 3rd generation is always very important to him, and he only goes in, when he talks about genealogy, he always goes in 3 generations. So with oral literature, then, you have to listen, and the images are created by listening. With written literature, you use your eyes. It's the juxtaposition of words, how the words are placed on a page, and how they create an image. With visual literature, it's the image itself that becomes the vocabulary. How is the image presented? What are the angles that you see in an image? Is it a close shot or a far shot? Things of that nature. What is the relation of one shot to the next one? What is the relation between the gutter, between the 2 images, etc.? But it's all literature. That's why I'm interested in film, actually, because it's part of literature. So that you have these 3 literatures, and they each have their specific vocabulary. So with the Odyssey, we have to pay attention to the repetitions, the digressions, and especially the similes and the myths and the way they're used. For example, everybody knows in Homer's time that Helen ran away from home with Paris because of love. Love is represented by Aphrodite. So Aphrodite made her do it. But when she's introduced to us in these 4 books that I'm discussing today, Homer says Helen came out of her bedchambers looking like Artemis. Why not Aphrodite? Why Artemis? Well, Artemis is a goddess that was the most possessive, concerned about her virginity. She was a virgin goddess. She was a pure goddess. So he's making a statement for you to hear and visualize. She came like Artemis. That means that she's no longer under Aphrodite's spell. She has repented, according to Homer. She's now very domesticated. He says as that, but then there's a catch to that, as you'll see with what follows. This is in book 4, and I'll get to that when we're discussing. But the emphasis is on hearing with oral literature. So that's my first comment. Now, the this is book one. And the other thing I want to point out, when I read the epics, the Odyssey and the Iliad, I try to find the episodes or the rhapsodes, the songs that were stitched together to create these epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. This is kind of personal because different people might see the rhapsodes in a different way. However, some are very obvious. For example, I put percentages when I divide a book into its parts. Book one is very obvious to most people that read Homer. There's an introduction, and then the rest of the book is on Ithaca. It takes place there. 79% of the book is in Ithaca, only 21% is introduction. That tells me where the author is putting the emphasis. In other books, I might discover that many songs are stitched together, and by seeing how much emphasis he gives to each song, you begin to see what he's trying to do, what he's trying to say, how he's trying to say it. So for me, the percentages become very important when I discover the various sections of a book. This one, as I said, is very obvious, very simple. So here I've outlined book one pretty much. The introduction is interesting because it does three things. Last time I discussed the prologue, which is the invocation, the prayer, which is only about 10 to 12 lines in length. And it sets up the story. It merely tells us that the author is going to be inspired by God to sing this particular song to us. That it's not his doing, it's that there's some greater force in him that is allowing him to do this. Today we would say inspiration, but there is no such thing as inspiration at this time yet because the alphabet hasn't been invented. So it's the god, the muse, singing through Homer. And then the second thing that he does that's very important in the entire Odyssey is to introduce this Atreus myth, which appears in 6 of the 24 books of the Odyssey. So it's very important to him because it's the myth that he uses to contrast and compare Odysseus and his family to the Atreus family. The Atreus family, as he sees it, is Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, his wife, and Orestes, the son. That is compared to Odysseus, Penelope, his wife, and Telemachus, the son. And it's mostly given for Telemachus' sake because Orestes had to kill his mother's lover and even his mother because they killed the mother and lover killed his father. So it's an example for Telemachus. Should Odysseus be alive and should he return to Ithaca, it's up to Telemachus to see that his father survives. And if he has to kill his mother, then he should. It's the right thing to do. Although he doesn't have to because Penelope is presented as the good wife, whereas Clytemnestra was the bad wife. And you have many examples throughout the Odyssey to show this. As a matter of fact, when Agamemnon were told when to war, he had to put somebody in charge to look after Clytemnestra. Why did he have to do that? He doesn't trust her. Who did he put in charge? He put in charge a singer of songs. That's a little plug for Homer himself. They're the most trustworthy people. And he was supposed to watch after Clytemnestra, which he did. But Thyestes, Agamemnon's cousin, who takes over the kingdom, has him shipped off to an island, the singer, which leaves Clytemnestra exposed, and he takes over, makes love to her, and eventually plots the death of his cousin Agamemnon when he returns. So you get all this, and you get the comparisons. So what's a good wife? A good wife is one who locks herself in her bedroom for 20 years and waits for her husband. And that's what Penelope does. And it's important to the Greeks that this is the case because it's a patriarchal society. And a man has to know who his heirs are so they can leave the property to the heir. So it doesn't matter that Odysseus has affairs along the way. It doesn't mean anything. But if Penelope would have one, she would produce an heir that is not a true heir for Odysseus. So you have that. So Atreus myth becomes very important. And it becomes important for one other very important, it's the theory that comes. It's the first time in Western literature that Homer makes this statement. And he makes a statement, up to this point, everything that happens to people happens because the gods will it to happen. So there's no free will yet. However, in the Odyssey, for the first time in history, you begin to see this. And I want to show you the passage here. Let me see. I have it marked. The right at the beginning, Zeus talks about this myth, and he says, this is line about 32. In this version, Latimer's version, is page 28. He says, "Oh, for shame, how the mortals put the blame upon us gods, for they say evils come from us, but it is they, rather, who by their own recklessness win sorrow beyond what is given, as now lately beyond what was given." For the first time, he says, we're not responsible for everything. It's up to the individual. The gods are there to guide people, but eventually they do what they will do anyway. And in talking about this myth, he's talking about the cousin Aegisthus, who Zeus says was warned that he should not have anything to do with Agamemnon's wife. And Zeus sent the messenger god Hermes to tell him this, which he did, because it has so Hermes told him. But for all his kind intention, he could not persuade the mind of Aegisthus, and now he has paid for everything. So they warn him, and then they leave you alone. This is the right thing to do. Now it's up to you to do it or not to do it. He didn't do it, and he has to die for it, because Orestes is going to come home, find that his father has been killed by his mother and her lover, and he's going to kill them both. Yes?
You never see the fact, and I assume it is one in the myth, that Clytemnestra sent her daughter, and she was killed for wearing...
Oh, that's another myth at an earlier time. You're talking about Iphigenia.
Yes.
Iphigenia, yes. That's...
I would think Clytemnestra would be ready to kill her husband.
Well, that's what the tragedians eventually say. That's in the 5th century BC. We're now in the 8th century BC.
Okay.
Homer doesn't recognize that. And the reason he doesn't, either the myth has not yet been developed to include Iphigenia, or he ignores it. Because it's a patriarchal society, he doesn't want anything to do with it. So we don't know exactly, but these myths grow. It's not that they're set at a particular time and they remain. The myths were picked up by the tragedians in the 5th century, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and they changed them so they could use them for their own means, to say whatever they wanted to comment on their century. So the authors have the freedom to change the myths to a certain extent. You can't change the core of the myth. It's called the myth, you-are. You can't change that. For example, in what we're doing now, Helen has to be taken to Troy, and Troy has to be destroyed. Everybody knows that. That's the part of the myth you can change. But how you get there can be changed. And that's why Homer has so many digressions, because the audience always says, hey, that's not the way it happened. But eventually he's going to bring you back to the way it happened. But that's what keeps the story going and what makes it exciting, by trying to derail it, to take it in a different direction. So that's why I say Homer uses the parts of the myth that apply to what he wants to say at that particular moment. He does mention Iphigenia, but not by name. Somewhere, either, I think it's in the Iliad, he says Agamemnon had 3 daughters, and he calls one Iphanasa, who many think could be Iphigenia, but it might not be. So you have to listen to what Homer is saying and forget the myths as you know them, because the way we know them is the way Robert Graves has put them together in the 20th century, not the way Homer understood them. Okay, and then the next thing that's important is to ask about Odysseus. Where is he? Why was his homecoming aborted? How is his homecoming going to proceed? How is he going to get back? And that's what you do in a few lines only, because the Telemachia, the first 4 books, are about the son waiting, preparing himself to help his father. It's the portrait of an artist as a young man, as James Joyce puts it in his novel. That's the Telemachia, preparing the young man to meet his responsibilities as an adult. So it's all a matter of preparation and what it takes to prepare someone to be a king. So we find out, the only thing we're told is that Odysseus is being kept somewhere by a goddess, Calypso. And it's interesting that this is the second to the last adventure. Out of 12 adventures, Calypso is number 11. And it's the only adventure of 2 that was created by Homer. All the rest were around. He merely reuses them. But Calypso and the Phaeacians, the 12th, he created. And he created in order to account for the 10 years that Odysseus is supposed to be away. Because the adventures that were around accounted for 3 years. So what happens to the other 7? So he creates a story that takes care of the other 7. Odysseus stays with Calypso for 7 years. But Calypso is important because it also, in Greek, Calypso, kalypsin, means to hide. So Odysseus is being hidden till his sins are forgiven and he can come back to the world. Remember, he's being battered around in the sea because he went against the gods. He stole the statue of Athena from Troy. It's told to us in the first line of the poem. He sinned, so he has to pay for that. Others, depending on the sin, have to die for what they did. Odysseus has to suffer for his, and after 10 years, he will be released. And it's now time for him to be released, and that's what we're told in the introduction. Athena comes to Zeus and says, "Isn't it time for Odysseus to be set free?" And then Zeus goes through the Atreus myth to compare him to the other family and says, yes, he's a good man, he's done good things, we can finally release him. So Calypso is hiding him in nowhere. The place that's described is supposed to be in the middle of the sea, that even Hermes, who can fly there in no time at all, says it's too far away to do it. That's how far away he's been kept. In other ways, he's dead, and he's going to be brought back to life. because kalypsin also has the meaning of death in it. That's the introduction. There's a lot more, but we can't do everything. So I'm just introducing it. And then the rest of the first book is in Ithaca. And the emphasis in Ithaca is going to be a comparison between Telemachus and his situation and the suitors, 108 of them, that are after his mother. And in order to force her to select one of them, for the past 3 years, they are staying in Odysseus' palace, eating his food, slaughtering his cattle and his pigs, and feeding themselves on purpose so that Penelope will select one of them by wasting away Telemachus' inheritance. But Telemachus is too young. Odysseus left him as a baby, so we presume if he's been away 20 years, he's about 20 now. And he knows nothing about ruling because he's been brought up by women, and that's made a point. Because Laertes, his grandfather, who should be king, gave it up, and he's on a farm, and he never comes into the city. So he's been brought up by his mother, the maids, the old women that take care of him, Euryclea, his nurse, and there's no man whatsoever to show him the way. So that's why Athena decides she's going to come to prepare him for his father. And the gods always appear in the form of mortals. So she takes the personality of several people throughout these 4 books. The first one is Mentis, and the second one is Mentor. People confuse the 2 names as one, but they're 2 different people. There's a Mentis when she first comes, and then she becomes Mentor. And she comes to persuade Telemachus to go and see some men, important men, who might help him regain his kingdom and teach him how to rule. The 2 most important men that have come back from Troy already are Nestor, who is an older man, and in oral literature, the older you are, the wiser you are. It's the opposite of today. You always look to the old for advice. That's because it's an oral culture, and the old remember how things were done, similar things were done earlier, and they can say, this is how we did it 30 years ago, and it worked. You might try that. Today we have law books. We have Brown versus Jones. You can go to the shelf and see how it was done. But then it was word of mouth. So because he's old, he's the wisest of men. And he's the first one that Telemachus is going to visit. That's going to happen later in the 3rd book, actually. And then he's going to go to Menelaus in the 4th book, who is the husband of Helen. And that's the book that I'd like to spend more time if I get there. In the situation in Ithaca, Athena comes, as I say, she's trying to tell Telemachus to teach him the way things should be. You have the suitors, what's going on with the suitors, 108. You're told something about Laertes, who is the grandfather. You meet Penelope for the first time. You meet the 2 leaders of the suitors, Antinous and Eurymachus. They're the 2 leaders. And finally, you meet the nurse, Euryclea, who has a major role in the Odyssey, because she will be the first to recognize the beggar who is Odysseus by identifying the scar that he received on his thigh when he was a very young man. So you get a cast of characters that are introduced. The important thing that happens in this book is you see the etiquette, how a person should behave. And the emphasis is always on hospitality. when Athena comes in disguise, nobody knows that she's anybody but this character Mentes. The first thing that Telemachus done is to relieve her of her weapons, to put them up where they should be stored so that no accidents occur, to feed her, to ask no questions whatsoever who she is, and after she has eaten, then he can say, "Can I ask, what's your name? Who are you?" Because she could be a thief, she could be a robber, that doesn't matter. Hospitality demands that you do this to people, that you receive them, that you feed them, no matter who they are. And the people in return have to act justly towards their hosts. That's why the story of Helen's abduction is so important. You cannot go into somebody's house and abduct somebody's wife. You're breaking Zeus's law, and you have to be punished for that. So the Greeks going after the Trojans and destroying them is the right thing to do, according to Homer. That's the way things should be. So we get all that at the very beginning. And if you read closely the way Telemachus acts, for example, I'll show you something else that becomes very subtle with Homer throughout. As I said, the first thing they have to do is feed the person. Okay, so they're going to feed them. But it's the way it's done that's important. Okay. This is on page 30, lines 136. That's why I use this particular translation, by the way, because it's line for line as Homer has it, where I notice many of you are using a good translation, Fagel's, but he doesn't follow the lines. The original lines of the Odyssey are up here in Fagel's. The lines on the page are his own. Whereas in Lattimore, the lines are the same for Homer and for the translation. So it's easier to refer to. Anyway, in the first book, it shows us how they're going to be served. A maidservant brought water for them and poured it from a splendid and golden pitcher, holding it above a silver basin for them to wash. And she pulled a polished table before them. It goes on. But I want you to contrast this with the suitors now coming in. They come in. They took their places. That's on line 145. They took their places in order on chairs along the benches, and their heralds poured water over their hands for them to wash with. And the serving maids brought them bread heaped up in the baskets, and the young men filled the mixing bowls with wine for their drinking. Now it goes on. But that's enough to show you a difference. With Telemachus and Athena, the emphasis is on quality. It's a silver basin, it's a polished table, it's a silver spoon. With the suitors, it's quantity. They could care less about what the dish is. Just heap up the bread. Give us food. That shows the difference between a certain type of person that Telemachus is as compared to the kind of person the suitors are. When you talk about the art of the utensils and all, you're talking about a polished person. This is adequate. They don't have it. They're bad people. These are good people. The adjective, the epitaph, not the epitaph, the adjective that is used to describe Odysseus throughout these 4 books is thoughtful is the word that is used. Thoughtful Telemachus. And the word is used for others alone, for Menelaus, for Nestor. It means he is wise, he is rational, he thinks before he speaks, which is a quality that you have to have if you're going to succeed. So by repeating, I think it's used something like 20 to 30 times just in the first few books. Thoughtful Telemachus. whereas the suitors are not thoughtful, and that's why they act the way they act. So that's the kind of thing you have. And Athena, during this period, is going to convince Telemachus that he has to prepare to take over the kingdom, and he has to prepare for ruling. And the first thing he has to do is go to the assembly. Now we get into the second book, because the entire second book is again in Ithaca, but look at the percentages here. The assembly takes up 60%, and even the second part, which is the aftermath, is still in the assembly. So the entire second book talks about the assembly, which shows you the importance of the assembly in this society. It's a democratic process where the people of Ithaca meet to discuss any problem that concerns Ithaca. But there are certain rules for an assembly. For example, an assembly cannot be called for private purposes. It has to be for the general public. And so when Athena tells Telemachus to call an assembly to give his address, the State of the Union address, he doesn't know how to go about it. And he gives a very private comments, which upsets the assembly. So he has to learn there too. So he goes to the assembly and he says, I have a problem. There are 108 men that want to marry my mother. They're eating me out of house and home, and I want you to help me get rid of them. Well, he can't say that, because the first man that's introduced, which is interesting again, is a man by the name of Aegyptios. Aegyptios is an old man, a good citizen of Ithaca, and he has 4 sons. And 4 of the sons, I give the name of 2 of them, because Antiphos, he doesn't know this. You know this, but the father doesn't know this. Antiphos is the last man that the Cyclops is going to eat. And he's waiting for his son to come back from the war. And he thinks, oh, it's an assembly. It has to be a very important situation that they want to announce. Maybe the end of the war. Maybe my sons are coming back. Well, they're not coming back. Antiphos, as I say, is going to be eaten by the Cyclops, and Eurynamos, he doesn't know that either, is going to be killed in Troy. He already has been killed in Troy, but he doesn't know this. So he's going to lose 2 sons, and when Odysseus does come back, he's going to come back all alone after he left Troy with 256 sons. None of them come back. So you can see why the people would be upset, and why the suitors can do what they're doing and not get any help from the general public, because they're thinking of their own fathers and sons that were lost, that Odysseus didn't come back with. So it's interesting that Homer gives us this person first in the assembly. He's the first to stand up and speak and say, why are we having this assembly? Is the war over? Are my sons coming back? And here Telemachus is saying, no, I want you to help me retain my kingdom and my household and my things, my property. Well, they don't go for that. So that's what happens at the beginning, which shows his immaturity, Telemachus' immaturity. He's not a speaker. He can't really express himself, and he's not ready. So we have that. We can see why Athena wants to send him to get help. And then we also have to go through the weaving trick, which is Penelope weaving a shroud for her father-in-law, Laertes, because as a daughter-in-law, she's responsible for him. And she's thinking ahead of his funeral and all, and she has to have this shroud that every man has to have. And it's a way for her to put off the suitors by holding them off, saying to them, wait till I finish this task that I have as a daughter-in-law, and after this I will select one of you to marry. But at night she unravels what she does during the day. And she's been doing it for 3 years and fooling the suitors till one of the maids that is having an affair with the suitors, 12 of the maids are having affairs, and they're going to be hung at the end for their affairs, which is something that, what's her name, Margaret Atwood doesn't like, and wrote a novel and a play objecting to that. She has the maids. She's on the maid side that were hung. But that's another story. So you get the weaving trick to show us what's going on, why the suitors. This also tells us how long this has been going on. Have the suitors been after Penelope for the 20 years that Odysseus had been away? No, just the last 3. They finally decided that after so many years, this man is not coming back home. So somebody has to take over Ithaca, and all of them want to be king. And we again get Odysseus' status. They talk about him. Where might he be? What happens if he does come back? Should he come back? There shouldn't be any problem because it would be 108 to 1. He can't possibly do anything, even he should come back, but he's not going to because it's been too long now. And then we have the journey preparations for Telemachus. He sees all these problems. He sees that the only thing he can do is try to get help. So he's off to the 2 men that might be able to help him, who have returned for Troy and have returned home finally. Many others didn't make it. That takes us to the 3rd book. And the first place he goes is Pylos, the kingdom of Pylos, which is the kingdom of Nestor. And what you see in these 2 books, 3 and 4, are the qualities that are needed for a good king. And it's sacrifice, belief in the gods, and hospitality. This book is all about sacrifice. The next book is all about hospitality. So you can see again with the percentages. Sacrifice to Poseidon. 81% of the book is given over to sacrifice to Poseidon. As a matter of fact, the book opens, the first scene that you get in this book is that they approach the ship of Telemachus, comes into Pylos, and he sees 4,500 people, 4,500 praying. They're divided in 9 divisions of 500 people each. And each division of 500 people is given 9 bulls to sacrifice to Poseidon. 81 bulls are being sacrificed by 4,500 people. The emphasis is on sacrifice. That's why Nestor is such a good person. How do we know he's a good person? He has 6 sons living, and 1 has already died. That's 7. You're lucky enough to have 1 son, like Odysseus, Telemachus, and Agamemnon, Orestes. This guy has had 7. The gods must love him to give him that many sons. He also has daughters, but they're not mentioned. It just says, and there were daughters. And they do mention one of them because she washes or bathes Telemachus as a guest, which is the thing to do to guests, to bathe them and give them food before asking any questions. So that's how you know something about Nestor. He sacrifices to the gods. He's a very devout person, and the gods have given him what every man wants. And this is emphasized over and over because the moment Poseidon's sacrifice is over, you have 17% another sacrifice following to Athena. And that's one, and in that sacrifice, they go through step by step so you can see what a sacrifice entails. How they bring the bull, they gild the horns in gold before they slaughter it. They catch the blood. They do things with it. They decapitate the animal. They roast the meat. They eat the meat. And they burn the bones for the gods. The gods get the leftovers. But they must have the leftovers. You cannot not do this to the gods. Every time they drink, for example, the first drop of their drink has to be poured on the earth as a dedication to the gods. If you forget to do that, you're going to suffer later on. And after all these sacrifices, Nestor gives Telemachus whatever news he has. He doesn't have that many, but now we begin to get the nostoi, that is the returns. Who returned from Troy other than Odysseus? And what do these men know of these returns? Nestor knows something, because he knows when he left Troy, Odysseus left with him, and Menelaus left with him on their own ships, but they left at the same time. But at some point, Odysseus decided to return back to help Agamemnon, and Nestor continued on his journey. You get all these stories. So he knows a little bit, but he doesn't know what happened to Odysseus. And he says to Telemachus, maybe Menelaus knows a lot more than I do, because he was with him longer, and he might be able to help you, and he returned only recently. Menelaus was detained 7 years coming back from Troy. Odysseus 10 years. Nestor came back in a week, because he's a good person. He never sinned. So that's what goes on. And there are other things that are being discussed about why did some people return and not others. And the bottom line is that those that did not return sinned. They forgot to sacrifice. Those that returned made some mistakes, and they're suffering for it, but they will eventually return. So you have these three parts: the sacrifices that take up most of the book. As you can see here, 98% of the book is based on sacrifices, and then the last 2% is where Nestor gives Telemachus a chariot and a guide, his son, Pisistratus, his youngest son, to accompany Telemachus to Menelaus. They can go by chariot from Pylos to Sparta. It's both in the southern part of the Peloponnese. So they can use the chariot to get there. And Odysseus, Telemachus' companions are going to stay in Pylos in their ship to wait till he gets back. Now, dates are confused in the Odyssey. The dates in the first 4 books are 6 days. Book 1 is day 1. Book 2 is day 2. Book 3 is 3, 4, and 5. Poseidon is day 4. Athena is day 5. The other way, 3, 4, and 5. And on the 5th day, they leave for Sparta. They get there in the evening of the following day, the 5th, and they stay the 6th. Then, when we go to the next set of books, you're not going to hear of Telemachus till book 15 again. And when you hear of him, it's a month later. Now, what happens in between the month when he left on the 6th day, we don't know how things, but Homer isn't interested in those things. That's poetry. You don't care about details like that. So, after Pylos, we go to book 4, which is an important book. Where am I here? Oh, this is still in Nestor, and I have down here some of the things that he talks about that I mentioned. Nestor and his 7 sons. the general sacrifices. The Atreus myth comes up again. It comes up all the time because this has to be kept foremost in the mind of Telemachus. Do as Orestes did. You have to go back to your kingdom takeover, and if you have to kill those that are trying to take over your kingdom, you do so, even if it's your own mother. That's what you're being told there. And then the adequate again, the same kind of thing. When they're going to eat, you're described, Homer describes the plates, the utensils, the cups, when Telemachus and Nestor are eating. When those that are not important are eating, those things are of no concern. It's quantity, quality versus quantity that they show. And then at the end they journey to Sparta. So he goes to book 4, which is actually the important book. It's all about hospitality. 74% is hospitality. And that's shown to you immediately as you start reading book 4. They arrive in the evening of the 5th day, Pisistratus and Telemachus. They come up to the palace of Nestor, and it seems something is going on in the palace. And when the main manager or the main servant comes forward, he doesn't know what to say. He says, wait a minute, let me go see Menelaus. And he goes to Menelaus and says, we have 2 visitors. Should I allow them to come, or should I send them to a neighbor? And Menelaus gets very upset. How dare you turn away guests when I relied on guests for my survival? And why should we send them away? Well, the thing is that there's a wedding going on, a double wedding. Menelaus' daughter, Hermione, by Helen, is being married to Achilles' son. She's being sent away. The woman always goes to the man's place. And then he has a son, but not by Helen, by a slave woman. His name is Megapenthes, which in Greek means great sorrow. And it's great sorrow because he's not a legitimate heir. It has to be both by father and the mother. And he's being married to somebody. So the servant thinks that since there's so much fuss with a wedding going on, maybe the guests should go to a neighbor's house where they can be treated correctly, the right way. But Menelaus won't hear of it. He has them come in. He doesn't tell them anything about the wedding. He takes care of them like nothing is going on. The best example of that is a myth where Hercules goes to a house where the woman, Alcestis is her name, is ready to die, or has died for her husband's sake. The husband was supposed to die, but she's taking his place. It's a good wife. She's dying for her husband. And Hercules knows nothing about it. They welcome in the house. They give him everything he needs. And by accident, he discovers that there's been a death. And he says, why did you do all this for me? They said, it's hospitality. We don't want you to get upset that there's a death in the family. And that motivates Hercules to go to hell and bring Alcestis back to life. That's another myth. But that's an example of hospitality. To show you how much emphasis they put on this. When Telemachus is ready to leave Menelaus, the host is supposed to give a gift. And depending on the quality of the gift, it shows you the quality of hospitality that you receive. Menelaus tries to give Telemachus horses, but Telemachus says, I can't take horses because in Ithaca we don't have pastures, it's all mountains. And because he's so thoughtful as a young man to think of this, Menelaus says, I'm going to give you a bowl made by Hephaestus himself. Hephaestus is one of the Olympian gods, the blacksmith god, which means it's great value. This is not just by an important artist, but it's by God himself. to show you how much emphasis they put on hospitality. So you get a lot of this throughout. Now, the important thing in this book is the way that Homer uses mythology to comment on the psychology of characters. You still don't have the psychology as we know it today. For example, Homer doesn't know what a soul is. He does talk about psyche, which in our time is soul, but he also talks about nous, N-O-O-S, which is found in the head. He also talks about thymos, which is found in the chest. So any of those qualities could be that which gives mortals life, but they don't know what it is yet. So they use this different terms. But he still sees into the character of people and what they are. And this is shown very clearly, especially in this book. So, where this happens is when Telemachus and his friend enter the palace, they're greeted by Menelaus. And then Helen comes in. It's the first time you meet Helen after she's come back from Troy. And that's why I say, Homer says she comes like Artemis, not like an Aphrodite, like an Artemis, very domesticated, a very true wife. And they recognize Telemachus, and they say, oh, you look like Odysseus. Let us tell you what a great man he was. And of all the stories that they can come up with Odysseus, because they know him, they knew him all during the war, they each select a story that they remember about Odysseus. And they tell the story to Telemachus. First Helen, and then Menelaus. The order is important, that it's Helen followed by Menelaus. Homer does this on purpose. And these passages, part of them I have to read what's going on here, because it's very interesting. Okay, let me see, Helen. Okay, as they're sitting there talking, before they do anything, Helen serves wine. Yes?
What lines are you reading?
Oh yeah, I'm going to read right now 220, line 220, book 4, page 71 in Latimer. But it's line 220 for everybody else. So, Helen serves drinks, but she says this, which is interesting. Homer says, into the wine of which they were drinking, she cast a medicine of heart ease, free of gall, to make one forget all sorrows. And whoever had drunk it down once, it had been mixed in the wine bowl, for the day that he drank it would have no tear to roll down his face. Not if his mother died, and his father died. Not if men murdered a brother, or a beloved son, in his presence with a bronze. That's a very powerful drug that she's putting in the drinks of her guests, and herself and her husband. And the question is why? Well, Homer doesn't tell you. She does this, and the story goes on. And then she says, I will tell you, this is line 240, I will tell you, what I will tell you is plausible. I could not tell you all the number, nor could I name them all that make up the exploits of enduring Odysseus. But here is a task, such as that strong man endured and accomplished in the Trojan country, for you Achaeans, that's the Greeks, suffered miseries. So of all the stories she can tell about Odysseus, this is the one that she picks to tell in front of her husband and Telemachus. She says, and this is a myth that can be found elsewhere, but Homer again uses it for his own purposes and changes it somewhat to make his point. She says, this is Helen speaking. That's another thing I didn't say, that much of the Odyssey is in direct discourse. And that's what makes it interesting. It means it's through the words of the characters themselves. There's very little narration. Over half of the epic is in direct discourse. The characters speak for themselves. And Homer lets you, the audience, make up your mind about them from what they say. So she says, he flagellated himself. She's talking about Odysseus. With degrading strokes, then threw on a worthless sheet about his shoulders. He looked like a servant. So he crept into the wide-wayed city of the men he was fighting, disguising himself in the likeness of somebody else, a beggar, one who was unlike himself, beside the ships of the Achaeans, but in the likeness crept into the Trojan city, and they all were taken in. I alone recognized him, even in this form, and I questioned him. But he in his craftiness eluded me. But after I had bathed him and anointed him with olive oil and put some clothing upon him, after I had sworn a great oath not to disclose before the Trojans that this was Odysseus until he had made his way back to the fast ships and the shelters, and then at last he told me all the purpose of the Achaeans. And she goes on in this way. Now, according to her, this happened about 3 to 4 years into the war. And what she's telling us is that she has already changed her mind about being abducted. Because 3 or 4 years into the war, Odysseus crept in as a spy in Troy as a beggar. She alone recognized him. She welcomed him. She didn't tell the Trojans, although she's supposed to be a Trojan now. Remember, she's married to Paris, the prince of Troy. She bathed him. What business does a queen have bathing a beggar, even though he's Odysseus? The maids do that work. But she says, I bathed him, anointed him with oil, helped him in his spine. He left. She didn't tell anybody. She made sure he got away safely. He killed men in doing this. And she did this. My heart had changed by now and was for going back home again. And I grieved for the madness that Aphrodite bestowed when she led me there away from my own dear country, forsaking my own daughter, my bedchamber, and my husband, a man who lacked no endowment, neither of brains or beauty. She's saying, Menelaus is sitting next to her, remember, when she's saying all this. So she's making out that at some point early in the war, she changed her mind. She was again for the Greeks. She helped the Trojans. Now, Menelaus says, oh, I remember a story too. He says, yes, my wife, all this you said is fair and orderly. But let me tell you what I remember of Odysseus. He takes his story from the very end of the war. She takes it from the very beginning. And he says, here is the way that strong men acted and the way he endured action inside the wooden horse. He's taking you right up to the end of the war. He's going to tell us what a great man Odysseus is. But if you read closely, they don't really care about Odysseus. They care about themselves. They're talking about themselves. He says, then you came there, Helen. Helen came to the wooden horse. You will have been moved by some divine spirit who wished to grant glory to the Trojans. Well, she said by the 3rd year she was over the Trojans. He says, you came, and I remember you coming at the very end to the horse, and you came for the purpose of giving him glory. How? And Deiphobus was the brother of Paris, whom Helen marries after Paris dies. So not only does she stay in Troy, but she takes another Trojan. And Menelaus knows this. He says, and you came with Diphoebus, a godlike man, was with you when you came. 3 times you walked around the hollow ambush, feeling it, and you called out, naming them by name to the best of the Danaans, that's another name of the Greeks, and made your voice sound like the voice of the wife of each of us, of the Argives. Argives, Danaans, and Achaeans are the same, different Greek tribes. So what he's saying is, I remember you coming to this edifice, the horse, walking around it, and mimicking the voices of the wives of the men you thought were in the horse, trying to make them scream out to give themselves away so the Trojans would know and they wouldn't we couldn't destroy Troy. And he goes on to say, now I myself and the son of Titus, that's another warrior, and great Odysseus were sitting there in the middle of them, and we heard you crying aloud, and Diomedes and I started up, both minded to go outside, or else to answer your voice from inside. But Odysseus pulled us back and held us. He saved the day. That's his Odysseus story. But Odysseus saved the day by not allowing us to scream out. As a matter of fact, one young warrior, Anticlus, who was ready to answer, but Odysseus brutally squeezed his mouth in the clutch of his powerful hands, held him, so saved the lives of all the Achaeans, until such time as Pallas Athene led you off from us, till you finally got tired of mimicking and you went away. So he's saying, how can you tell me that you were for the Trojans in the 3rd year when I know that at the end of 10 years you were still with another lover and you were still trying to give us up? But they're very polite with each other in saying this, and they're sitting there doing this. And as they go on like this, Telemachus, who is a young man, it says here, then thoughtful Telemachus, line 290, then thoughtful Telemachus said to him in answer to Menelaus, great Menelaus, son of Atreus, leader of the people, so much the worse, for none of all this kept dismal destruction from him, not even if he had a heart of iron within him. But come, take us away to our beds, so that at last now we can go to bed and enjoy the pleasure of sweet sleep. He's saying, I'm not going to get anything out of these guys. They're hungry. We might as well go to sleep, because I'm not going to learn a thing about my father thereafter. Now that shows you why she's putting the drugs in the drinks. They're not such a happy couple as we think they are. They're putting on a show. As a matter of fact, they hate each other. Menelaus can't forgive her. He still thinks of Diphoebus and says, Paris took you away, but the moment he died, you had another lover. He had to bring her back because it's the right thing to do. She broke hospitality, and he has to take her back. But they're not happy anymore. And they have to drug themselves to be around each other. And that's what happens when they go to bed, even the last line. They go to bed, and Helen slept behind him. It's a very cold kind of comment. So that's how Homer explains throughout his characters. He lets them talk. He uses these myths, the parts of the myths he wants. The story for Odysseus going to Troy as a beggar is an important one. But Homer changes it so that Helen is part of it, so she's the one that welcomes him, etc., to make a point. And he only gives you as much detail as is necessary to make his point, which is to show the interaction between these characters. So that's how he makes you see in oral literature, using these myths, having the characters talk for themselves, and you have to put things together by what's going on. Remember what went before, what comes after, and it goes this way. So that's what happens in the evening when Telemachus and his friend arrive. That's the evening of day 5. The following day, on day 6, they have a whole day with Menelaus, where Menelaus tells us his own story. And that becomes important, what he says. Because he says that he's been away for 7 years, he couldn't get back home. And it's important for us to know that, because as a brother to Agamemnon, it's his responsibility as the next person in line in the family to make sure that his brother is avenged. So why didn't he kill the lover of Clytemnestra and the wife? Well, because he wasn't there. He wanted to be. But he was swept by winds, and he was gone for 7 years. So that gives us the reason why he's still a good person. He would have done his duty, but he wasn't there. And Orestes had to do it as a result. So that's the reason for that. But in telling his story, he tells us how he finally got home. And he was stranded, he says, on an island, not knowing how to get home, being kept there by forces, divine forces, the gods, till a woman appeared to him whose name was Idothea. She was a semi-goddess, and she was the daughter of a god of the sea. Proteus was his name. So now much of this section of day 6, much of that first book, is on Proteus. How Menelaus finally got away. What the girl tells him says she's the daughter of Proteus, and the only way Menelaus can get home is to have Proteus tell him the way home, because he knows everything. But Proteus is a shape shifter. So every noon he comes out of the ocean, he lives in the ocean with the seals, and he's responsible for his seals. He comes out at noon to take a nap with the seals, and he counts them. And when he knows that they're all there, he goes to sleep. So what Menelaus has to do is take 3 of his men, and he would be the 4th, and he has to substitute for 4 seals. And when Proteus comes out of the sea, he has to grab him. It's going to take all 4 of them to grab him, because he's going to become water, he's going to become fire, he's going to become a lion. And he has to hold on. And if he can hold on till Proteus goes through all of his forms and comes back to his original mortal form, he will then answer any question that you ask him. And he'll ask him, how do I get home? And you'll get a true answer. So this is what happens. The girl brings 4 seal skins that she puts over these 4 men. They wait for Proteus to come up. He comes up and counts. There's a lot of discussion in scholarship. Why doesn't Proteus notice that some seals are gone? And the answer that scholars have come up with is because he counts in 5s. And Menelaus is 4 with his 3 men, and Proteus make the other 5. So there's an equal number of 5s, and he doesn't have to count every which one. I have 5s, they all come out in 5, so they're all there, so they go to sleep. That's the latest thing of that. But Menelaus does grab Proteus with his men. They hold on. He goes through all his forms, and he finally, in his mortal form, he says, Menelaus, I know it's you. What do you want from me? And Menelaus says, I want to know how I get home. And Proteus tells him that he forgot to pay respect to the gods when he was blown to Egypt, and he has to go all the way back from where he is to Egypt, which is a long trip, and sacrifice to those gods, who will then release him, and he can sail home. By the way, he's left with, Homer doesn't mention that, but in the Iliad we know that Menelaus went with something like 80 to 100 ships of soldiers, and each ship has anywhere from 12 to 15 soldiers in them. You don't know exactly how many, but that's a lot. But he only has 10 ships left in the Odyssey, so he's lost quite a few also. But again, we skip over that. Homer doesn't make much of that. The point is the Proteus story, which is emphasizing something important. To make it, one of the main words I told you, thoughtful, is important for Telemachus. The other word that comes in these 4 books is endurance. The Greek word that they use is tetliote thimo, which means a certain kind of endurance. If you don't have endurance, you cannot make it. The reason Odysseus makes it home, because he endures. He takes whatever is thrown at him. And that's what Proteus shows. In order to make it, you have to hold on to change, no matter what. You hold on to Proteus as he goes through fire and water and lion and everything else. And if you can endure, if you can hold on, you're going to make it. If you give up, you're not going to make it. And that's the point that's being made with Proteus. And that's something that we have to follow throughout the entire Odyssey. One of the, which I'll come to later, I think in book 17, one quotation which many scholars take as being the theme of the Odyssey is just that. And Odysseus says to himself, what a creature man is. When things are going well, he's happy and he's jumping around, but when things go wrong, all of a sudden he's upset and he can't do anything. And what you need is to take the good with the bad, to endure, and then you're going to make it, which is a major theme of the Odyssey. So that's what we learn in these first 4 books. And Telemachus is educated by these men, and he's ready to return. So the last thing that happens in the book is we return to Ithaca. Notice how we start in Ithaca, we return to Ithaca in the first 4 books. In the entire Odyssey, we start in Ithaca, at the very end we return to Ithaca. It's all very organized. And we see what's going in Ithaca. And what's going on in Ithaca, the suitors have just discovered that Telemachus is gone. They didn't know he was gone. He threatened to go on a journey. But the suitors never thought that he would do it, because they didn't know that Athena was behind all this. So now they discovered that he is gone, and they're going to take him more seriously. They say, this is serious. What if he comes back with an army from his father's friends and tries to take over? We should do something about this. So they decide they have to kill him. And they decide that they're going to take a ship, put so many of their companions in it, and wait for him as he's returning, as he's approaching Ithaca, so they can murder him. So they prepare the ship, they get the ship ready, and you see it going out to a little island near Ithaca called Asteris. It's just a rock, a very small place where they can hide to wait to see Telemachus' ship coming back so they can attack it. That's where the 4 books end. And you will know what happened to book 15 when he finally returns, because Telemachus is not going to come back till book 15. In the meantime, next time we're going to go to Odysseus, who is with Calypso, and he's trying to come home. In book 15, both father and son are going to meet at Eumaeus' the swineherd farm. And then we'll know whether they're going to catch Telemachus or not. So it's a cliffhanger. That's what Homer does. He takes you to a certain point, and then he goes on to something else. Where am I? Oh, okay. I'm there. I'll stop. I didn't know it was 11:44. It's supposed to be till 11:30. Yes.
Could you comment a bit on, Penelope was left hanging. She's upset that her son is going off, maybe ambushed. She's been informed about what's happening. And then, could you just talk a little bit about the role of Athena as she visits Penelope, to say something like, hang in there, it'll all turn out?
Yeah, what she does, Penelope doesn't know her son is gone. She finds out from the maid. The maid made a promise to Telemachus that she wouldn't say a thing to his mother unless she asked about him. Otherwise, the maid was to wait 12 days before she said anything. And when Penelope finds out that the son is gone, she's very upset, because now she says, I not only lost my husband, I'm going to lose my son besides. So she's crying, etc. And Athena has to appease her. And the way she does is she sends Penelope's sister, Iphthime is her name. You don't hear about this sister except at this one point in the Odyssey. And she comes in a dream. Always the gods send dreams to people. And she tells her not to worry, because Athena is with Telemachus. The son is going to be fine. He's going to return. That makes her feel better. And Penelope in her dream asks, well, tell me about Odysseus. And Iphthime says, I can't. I'm not allowed to tell you about that. And she disappears. But she feels better. Penelope feels better because she knows that Athena is around. That's it with her. So there's not much with Penelope. There's one incident in the Odyssey with Penelope coming down at the very beginning of the Odyssey from her bedroom to say to the singer who is entertaining the suitors, could he play something that's less remindful of the war? Because the singers sing the latest songs, and that's important. That's called kleos, which means fame, which means news. To bring news is to give fame to people, because you're bringing news about the warriors. And Penelope says, it makes me sad. And Telemachus comes up and says, I like the recent music. We shouldn't play old tunes. New ones are best. Besides, I'm the authority in this house. Please go back to your bedroom. So you see him kind of, after Athena sees him, he takes it upon himself to be more manly.
I'm intrigued by the notion that the most elevated female in the household is bathing visitors.
Yeah.
Does this show that the household is especially hospitable, or is it just a way of keeping down the women?
No, it's a way of telling us that since Helen is bathing Odysseus, it has something sexual to do with it. She shouldn't be a queen. When Odysseus comes as a beggar, Penelope doesn't bathe him. She has the maids bathe him. And she sits aside. That's the proper way. The way that Helen is doing it goes against protocol and shows something about her. Although she says she comes out like an Artemis, she still has a lot of Aphrodite in her. That's the point that's being made. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.